The chill of that morning is seared into my memory, a physical sensation I can still feel on my skin. It was the day my life fractured, cleanly and irrevocably, into two distinct halves, the life I had before and the desolate, uncertain landscape I was thrust into after. The dawn had been reluctant, a pale, tired sun struggling through a gauze of gray cloud, and I remember foolishly thinking it was a fittingly humble beginning for something magnificent. I was on the precipice, my heart a drumbeat of quiet exhilaration. This was it, the culmination of every sacrifice, every skipped meal, every late night hunched over sketches until my vision blurred. My dream was simple in its purity, a design studio, a sanctuary of creativity. Not a corporate empire, but a warm, hopeful space where ideas could breathe. For years, I had funneled every spare cent, every fragment of time, every ounce of my spirit into this vision. And finally, trembling on the edge of possibility, I had assembled my prototype collection. It was more than fabric and thread. It was my soul rendered tangible, and I believed, with a child's fervent faith, that it could change everything. But the universe, in its cruel irony, was orchestrating a different finale. The thing I didn't know, the truth lurking in the shadows of my own trust, was that someone I had let deep into the inner sanctum of my hopes was not a guardian, but a saboteur. He had been studying my blueprint, not to help me build, but to learn exactly where to place the charges to bring it all down. And that someone was Daniel, my best friend, my chosen brother, the person whose voice I heard first with good news and last with my doubts. The man I once believed was the other half of my creative equation. I didn't understand then that his betrayal would be a surgical strike, personal and precise. It wasn't a crime of passion or sudden envy. It was cold, calculated corporate warfare waged on the battlefield of our friendship. By the time the veil was torn away, the damage felt absolute. My dream seemed ashes. Or at least, Daniel believed it was. He thought the game was over, the board cleared of my pieces. But betrayal, I've learned, is a poison that also acts as an antidote. The initial shock is paralyzing, a pain so deep it feels geological. Yet, as that agony settles, it leaves behind a terrifying, diamond-hard clarity. It strips away illusion. It shows you, with brutal honesty, the metal you're made of and the path you must now walk alone. And the justice that eventually found Daniel? It wasn't a thunderclap. It wasn't a dramatic, fiery crash. It was a silent, glacial force. It was the inevitable consequence meeting its cause. It unfolded slowly, with a quiet, relentless certainty, and it struck him in the one place he was most vulnerable, the very engine of his deceit, his bottomless greed. Let me tell you the full story. Let me walk you through the wreckage and the rebuilding. Our story began in the chaotic, hopeful mess of college. We were two halves of a seemingly perfect whole, bound by ramen noodles and big dreams. Daniel was the sun, charismatic, effortlessly social, a natural conductor of people and attention. I was the moon, quiet, observative, finding my language in lines, shades, and textures. He talked a future into the air. I quietly sketched its foundations. He dreamed in broad, sweeping strokes. I built in careful, meticulous details. We were, I thought, symbiotic. Our promise was a sacred incantation we'd repeat in our dingy dorm room. One day we'll build something real, together. Life after graduation sent us on diverging tracks. He navigated the world of marketing with his charm, landing a decent job. I retreated into the solitary world of a freelancer, each project a brick saved for my own fortress. Yet, the bond felt unbreakable. We spoke weekly, shared our frustrations and small victories. So, when the day finally arrived, when my savings met my goal, when the prototypes were perfect, he was my first call. The sound of his voice is etched in my mind, a masterpiece of false warmth. A design studio? Your own collection? That's huge, man. Incredible. I'm all in. Whatever you need from me, it's yours. The pride I heard, the supportive enthusiasm, felt like a shield. It never occurred to me that his mind was a vault, and I was willingly depositing every secret. He absorbed the details of my prototypes, the names of my niche suppliers, the nuances of my marketing strategy, the exact financial runway I had. I gave him everything because I operated on a fundamental belief that friendship was a fortress, impervious to the petty storms of ambition. But I was wrong. Ambition is a voracious beast, and while some feed it with their own sweat, others, like Daniel, learn to feed it with the stolen harvests of others. The unraveling started with faint, discordant notes I tried to explain away. A trusted supplier, suddenly and politely unavailable for a critical meeting. A manufacturer, whose quote had been solid for months, now citing unforeseen costs that doubled the price. My emails, once answered promptly, vanished into a void. Phone calls rang out into silence. The initial feeling was one of personal inadequacy. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. Maybe my dream was naive. But then, a pattern emerged from the chaos, a pattern that pointed to a malignant intelligence. Every door that slammed shut in my face seemed to swing open, miraculously, for someone else. A new entity was moving through the industry with a preternatural familiarity with my path, always one step ahead, smoothing the way I had found so suddenly rocky. The name was Ivory Line. It appeared out of nowhere, sleek and arrogant. And then their debut collection launched. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just similar, it was an echo, a ghost of my work. The thematic core, the aesthetic philosophy, even the specific, unconventional color palette I'd spent months perfecting, it was all there, repackaged with a more commercial sheen. Coincidence? I whispered to my panicking heart. The world is full of parallel ideas. But then I saw the logo. A sleek, minimalist white mark with a single, sharp gilded edge. A design Daniel had once doodled on a napkin during a coffee shop brainstorm, joking, "See? Clean but with a bite. Could be cool for something." The air left my lungs. I sat there for an hour, just staring. My mind became a courtroom. The defense attorney in me pleaded, Asterisk, it's a common motif. He's your friend. He cheered for you. Asterisk, the prosecutor, cold and new, presented the evidence, the closed doors, the mirrored collection, the logo. Doubt is a quiet tumor. It grows in the dark spaces of your mind, and once it takes root, it demands to be fed. Ignoring it became a full-time job. But the truth was a beast scratching at the door, and its patience was running out. The night of the revelation was a study in quiet despair. It was past 11, the silence of my apartment oppressive. I was pacing, trying to logic my way out of the mental prison, when my phone illuminated the gloom. A message from an unknown number. Just a line. Check the live stream. You need to see this. Below it, a link. A sane person would have deleted it. A broken person, clutching at straws, clicks. I clicked. The video buffered, and then erupted into light and sound. A launch party. A glamorous, high-energy event for Ivory Line. Champagne flutes glittered, a bass-thumping soundtrack filled the air, and a crowd of beautiful people milled about. And then the camera found him. Daniel. Center stage, holding a microphone like a scepter, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of money I knew he hadn't earned. His smile was a masterpiece of triumph. And his voice, when it came, was smooth and confident, weaving a story that felt like a physical assault. This collection, he announced, gesturing to the screens behind him where my designs, my children, flashed in altered but recognizable forms, is the culmination of my personal vision, my years of solitary dedication, my creation. Each word was a theft. The audience roared their approval, their admiration a wave crashing over his lie. I felt disembodied. A sharp, metallic taste of anger, a hollow ache of sadness, a scalding flush of humiliation. They all collided in the vacuum of my chest. This wasn't just business. This was erasure. This was him taking a scalpel to our shared history and cutting me out of the frame. I watched, numb, as he performed. And then he delivered the coup de grace, the line that shattered any last remnant of the man I thought I knew. He paused, looked sincerely at the crowd, and said, I built this alone. No one believed in me. The room swelled with sympathetic applause. No one believed in him. I had been his constant believer. When his own plans faltered, I was his cheerleader. When the world was indifferent, I was his audience. He hadn't just stolen my work. He had rewritten our past, airbrushing my loyalty out of the picture. In that moment, the heartbreak didn't transform into rage. It solidified into something else, a cold, clear, and focused determination. The emotional storm passed, leaving a landscape of absolute resolve. A promise formed in the silence of my soul, ironclad and simple. You took the dream, but I own the truth, and I will use it to rebuild my future while yours crumbles. My plan for justice was never about vengeance in the classic, destructive sense. I didn't want to ruin him in a way that caused collateral damage or dragged others into a mud fight. I wanted a restoration of balance. I wanted him to be held accountable not by my hand, but by the weight of his own actions. I wanted him to stare, unflinchingly, at the reflection of the person he'd chosen to become. My strength came from a simple fact: Daniel, in his arrogant triumph, had overlooked. The quiet one sees everything. I had been the archivist of our partnership. Every crumpled sketch from our college days, every digital prototype with its embedded creation date, every excited email chain where I detailed my inspirations, every text message where he'd asked clarifying questions about my brilliant concepts. I had them all. He had stolen the finished sculpture, but he'd left the entire workshop of molds, tools, and clay in my possession. The footsteps were all there, and I began to follow them with the patience of a hunter. My first moves were quiet, strategic reconnections. I reached out to the suppliers who had suddenly gone cold. Their hesitance was palpable, fear of the new, well-funded Ivory Line, a tangible barrier. But when I sat with them, not with accusations but with evidence, timestamp sketches predating Ivory Line's launch, draft contracts with my name, sample swatches I'd commissioned, their demeanor changed. Some were ashamed, realizing they'd been used as pawns. Some were angry at being misled. A few, with spines of steel, offered written statements. Next were the investors, the money men dazzled by Daniel's pitch and the groundbreaking collection. I requested discreet meetings. In calm, stark rooms, I played not the victim, but the historian. I laid out the chronology, a visual storyboard of theft. I didn't need to sell or persuade. I simply presented the facts and let their own business acumen connect the dots. The silence in those rooms after I finished speaking was more powerful than any outburst. Truth, when presented without hysterics, has a gravity that pulls all doubt into its orbit. Then I focused on my own renaissance. There was a crucial, arrogant slip Daniel had made during that fateful live stream. In his glowing description of Ivory Line's future, he declared, "Our next collection releases in 6 weeks." He saw it as a promise of dominance. I saw it as a deadline. While he was basking in his false glory, preoccupied with maintaining his lie, I was in the trenches, building something authentic, piece by painful piece. My new brand wouldn't be a reaction to him. It would be the pure, uncompromised expression he'd tried to snuff out. And I would launch it right in the shadow of his promised triumph. The day of my launch arrived not with terror, but with a profound, unsettling calm. It was the peace of having nothing left to hide. The venue was packed, a mixture of industry veterans, press, early supporters, and countless curious onlookers drawn by the swirling rumors of the real story behind Ivory Line. I stepped onto the stage, the glare of the lights a warm blanket. In my hands, I held not a garment, but my first, battered sketchbook. I looked out and began, my voice steady. "This," I said, holding the book aloft, "is where it all began. Long before it was taken. Long before someone decided to write me out of my own story." The room hushed. I opened the cover, and with a document camera projecting my every move onto the massive screen behind me, I began a journey. Page by yellowing page. The first, clumsy idea for the silhouette that became his flagship piece. The margin notes about fabric weight from 3 years ago. The color palette scribbled beside a coffee stain from my favorite cafe. The progression was undeniable, a visual DNA test leading straight from my mind to his product line. I narrated not with bitterness, but with the passion of the creator, explaining the why behind each line. I never uttered the name Ivory Line. I never said Daniel. The narrative built itself in the minds of the audience. A current of understanding, then indignation, began to ripple through the crowd. The whispers were a gathering wave. And then, as if summoned by the collective tension, I saw him. A movement at the very back of the hall. Daniel. He stood in the shadows of the doorway, his face a mask of dawning horror. The color had drained from his skin, leaving him waxen. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on the screen, on the incontrovertible proof of his crime being displayed to his entire world. He understood in that instant that the foundation of his empire was not just cracked, it was made of sand, and the tide was coming in. What followed wasn't a confrontation. There was no dramatic shout, no pointing finger. The justice that unfolded was passive, social, and absolute. As the applause for my presentation, for my truth, filled the room, I watched as individuals, people I recognized as his investors and key partners, subtly but definitively turned their bodies away from his presence in the doorway. They didn't need to confront him. Their turned backs were the verdict. He stood alone, witnessing the dissolution of his credibility in real time. The cost of his betrayal became clear in that silent moment. It wasn't just about losing a business. It was about becoming a phantom, a person to whom no doors would open because his word was now worthless. The aftermath was a quiet unraveling. Over the ensuing weeks, the house of cards that was Ivory Line swayed and collapsed. The highly touted Next collection, in 6 weeks, was first postponed, then quietly scrapped. Investor funding evaporated, the legal departments of various firms citing concerns over intellectual property provenance. Suppliers severed ties. The industry, which tolerates many sins, has a particular allergy to publicly exposed deceit. Daniel scrambled. He issued statements blaming competitive slander and creative differences. He tried to pivot, to rebrand, but the stain was permanent. The narrative had been set in stone by evidence, not allegation. Meanwhile, fueled by the powerful story of resilience and authenticity, my studio found its footing. The support wasn't just about pity, it was a celebration of integrity. Orders came in. Collaborations were offered. And for the first time since before the betrayal, I felt a sense of peace settle in my bones. It wasn't the euphoria of victory that would have meant my focus was still on him. It was the profound calm of self-reclamation. Justice, I realized, isn't the spectacle of the fall. It's the serene, upward climb of truth, finally able to breathe. The lesson carved into me by this experience is permanent. Proximity is not allegiance. The loudest cheerleader in your corner may be measuring you for a crown they intend to steal. But here is the crucial, saving grace. Betrayal, while it wounds to the core, does not have the power to define you. Instead, it acts as a brutal refiner's fire. It burns away the naive trust, the fuzzy boundaries, and reveals the unyielding core of who you are. It forges a clarity sharper than any weapon. Daniel believed he was stealing my future, but all he managed to pilfer was a snapshot, a single iteration of a dream that lived and evolved within me. He could not touch my destiny, because my destiny was tied to my continuous act of creation, not to any single product. The justice that found him was not a bolt from my hand. It was simply the world, finally seeing the same truth I saw. So, if you are in the aftermath of your own betrayal, if trust lies shattered at your feet, remember this. You do not need to become a monster to slay one. You do not need to shout to be heard. You simply need to stand, unshakably, on the solid ground of your truth. Gather your evidence, tend to your craft, and rebuild with integrity. Speak your story with facts, not fury. Because truth, in the end, is the most patient and the most powerful force in the world. It waits. It gathers mass. And when it finally moves, its impact is quieter than a scandal, but heavier than any revenge. It doesn't just hit back. It settles forever the score.